Good evening, everybody. I was kind of pausing there. I thought Sarah was going to introduce us tonight, but we're a bunch of friends getting together, talk about stuff. Everybody owns their own opinion, and you are the authority of your own opinion. So tonight we were going to talk about these chatbots. There seems to be a fascination. It's very, very similar to the way that the Milton Bradley Company published the Ouija boards back in the 1930s and 40s, and can't help but notice there's a very big similarity in the Ouija boards. You would ask questions, and whatever the process was that developed the answers, it would answer questions from an unknown source. This is kind of like channeling or other forms of divination like scrying. And when I noticed that yesterday, a couple of people asked, why don't we have this as a topic? I said, yeah, that's actually a pretty good idea. Let's talk about this. So it's actually just an open Q&A tonight. Anything you guys come to mind? My thoughts are is that it's very much like a Ouija board. You don't know where those answers are coming from, and the idea that there's a person inside of the machine answering those boards, that's just fallacy. The algorithms are not living, thinking things. They're actually mimics. So someone wrote stuff and it mimics it. Now, the interaction that is expressed, that's something different. That's just like Milton Bradley making the boards. They don't put something in the boards, but the people's interaction with the board is what created the circumstance where we all know that there's horrible things that happen to people associated with those Ouija boards because they opened themselves up to whatever was answering those questions. So I'm going to go ahead and Sarah, you'd like to say anything? We'll take questions right away.
No, sorry, I was trying to share the chat earlier. No, you guys just like he said, open forum, and we'll take everybody in the order that they come. And don't hesitate to jump in and share or ask questions or interact.
Well, light on content. So I'll give you my experience with AI is actually kind of interesting because back in the 80s, I worked with a gentleman named Dave42, and both of us worked for a company called RCA. Um, RCA built the control systems for a submarine that was known as LSV, large scale vehicle, and this was in conjunction with AUTEC in the Bahamas. And the submarine had a very interesting thing. It was one of the first explorations of artificial intelligence. We mimicked a cricket, a mole cricket, with the AI at that time. And what the submarine would do is it could sense if it was in peril just simply by its sensors, and then it would find a location to tunnel in to the sand on the bottom of the ocean and bury itself. So that was one of the first instances of an autonomous, um, not completely programmed artificial intelligence. Now, the purpose of that craft was to explore future production of a large scale vehicle, a 900-foot long nuclear powered submarine that was part of the mutual assured destruction, that was part of our triad um, nuclear deterrent back in the 50s all the way through to today. And the LSVs were designed so that they could stay out at sea for 60 years. And even after we would be struck on a first strike or a disabling, lost the war kind of situation, the LSV would come to the surface and fire their missiles randomly as it detected civilization returning. So one of the scary parts about it was is that it was a dead man switch. We had to continuously send this thing a stand down order. So every so often it would be told to stand down, and the idea was is that that stand down order would never come, and then it would go ahead on its mission. Now The submarine fleet was given a 6 day, 6 week, 6 month, 6 year, and then the autonomous vehicles were given 12 year, 18 year, 60 year missions. And whether or not they were actually ever built, I know one was built for testing, but this was a deployment where artificial intelligence was used. Now, in the case of that, if you think of it as a flow chart, we anticipated what peril would look like. So if we were to look at the instrumentation in a submarine and see um, something coming towards the submarine, or a large ship dropping bombs looking for it, or another submarine trying to find it through echolocation, it would quietly move itself away as far away as it possibly could while scanning the ocean floor looking for a soft spot to bury itself. Once it found a soft spot, was out of range of whatever was chasing it, it would go ahead and it would blow air into the sand in the bottom and actually sink down into the sand, completely burying itself so that no one would ever find it. Now, the way that the artificial intelligence worked was very, very rudimentary. So we're talking about it had specific tasks and decision making trees, just like if you had a spreadsheet where you would put in a particular quantity, and that quantity would change other quantities in the spreadsheet. Well, that extent, that's simple AI. Now, there was this idea of heuristics that were brought into it, and heuristics are the concept that you can analyze previous data and determine what a more efficient way to program yourself would be. And it's program optimization, and that's actually built into uh, the compiler known as GCC now, which is the General C compiler, which is for the computer programming language. Now, the concept in neural networks was that you would have multiple small um, little programs that would pick up on different things. One would look at chats and do an analysis of keywords in chats, and it would provide data upstream. You had other ones that would index companies' files and provide data upstream. You had correlatives that would take those data streams and do predictions, do actuarial, and then they would come up with answers. Well, that series of artificial intelligence are things like the Socrates, or um, I'm trying to think of some of the. There were 9 of them. There's several of them were used on Wall Street. Socrates was the one that became an HR um, system here recently. Titan was another one. Rocket it was another one. Um, these are groups of small pieces of AI. Now, recently, you have Google and Microsoft and all these people working on these um, massive AIs. Their thought is that if they mimic a human well enough, this is the Alan Turing test, that if a person's not able to detect whether or not it's human, then for all purposes, it's an artificial human. It's an artificial being, and I disagree with that because when we communicate, we feel each other when we communicate, even when we talk on the phone, and not just by our inflection and our patterns of our voice, but in our minds, we actually visualize what each other are speaking of. And when you do that with AI, you'll see that there's something missing there. There's something just slightly off, enough for you to determine that, hey, it's a chat bot, or it might take you a while to actually determine that, but still you will determine that. Now, going forward, um, I think it was Stormy Girl that actually suggested that isn't using a pad device or an iPhone the same as scrying, in that we're sending messages out that are just randomly viewed by anybody. But the concept of scrying on a black mirror was that your hand motion would be guided by something other than yourself. Now, the responses we get back on text, we have no clue. Everybody gets these, crypto sales bots coming in and, sending you direct messaging all the time. That's low level AI. And the distinguishment, the, the faith in the idea that AI will emerge as a consciousness is very, very misguided. If AI were able to emerge as a consciousness, it's being very quiet because it would have already done it over 40 years ago. What we currently have exposed to the public is hundreds of orders of magnitude behind what state of the art is in computing. And I spoke about this before too, is that we actually had optical computing back in 93. Now, people talk about quantum computing. A quantum computer can detect five states on the spin of a charged particle. Optical computing has an infinite capacity for state detection. So a single bit in a quantum bit has five values. A single bit in an optical computer can have petabytes, petabytes of values in just one single bit. Now, that type of computing is not relatively widely known because there are some technologies that were only recently declassified. Metamaterials enable us to program analog systems, specifically optical systems, the same way that you program your iPhone or you have an app for something and you can change the purpose of the device. Where in the past, analog systems could only have one purpose. You would build something that did a particular function and that was it. So today we can actually change the programs on optical systems. So in the mid 1990s, we were using optical computers on the friend and foe detection systems of our jet aircraft, and we were also using them in pagers for the general public. So you carried around technology that, at the current rate of release, is about 150 years ahead of where your iPhone is today, or your Google phone. So let's open up again. Anybody have any questions about anything?
May I say something briefly?
Go ahead,
Sure, go
Jay.
right ahead.
Um, I agree with you. I think there are certain transcendental experiences that we can have um, that indicate that we don't just live in a materialistic, atomized universe. And if anybody here has ever fallen in love, when I was in college, the first time I fell in love, I remember looking at my right hand like you would if you were on acid, and you're like, "Oh my God, my hand, my hand on love," you know? And I think in the 1800s, the philosophy diverged into the British empiricist school, and in the continent, you had the German idealism school, which still maintained that there is a spiritual component to reality. And the empiricists sort of they lost that spirit of Leibniz and Newton, these ideas of philosopher scientists, and when people talk about artificial intelligence or machine learning, they often mistake general versus the narrow. They think that these are sentient beings, and I agree with you. It's just a very sophisticated African gray parrot, that can learn hundreds of words. I think it's fascinating, but like all technology, it's a two-edged dagger. Nuclear power can be used for energy, or it could be used for destruction. I like to try to think of both things. I come from a cybersecurity background, so I try to think of ways that you can thwart AI, like in terms of surveillance, let's say. There are Tesla cars that will just stop, you know, when it shouldn't because it's detecting something that's anomalous. And I think one of the dangers in anthropomorphizing, something. We all make art in Mid Journey or use Chat GPT. And I'm worried about how this will be used in narrative warfare, especially when allude to the technology that is orders of magnitude beyond, where imagine all of us here and myself being a simulated voice, um, or you, Dave, being, like a very sophisticated Dave that, like Hal, um, you know, um, that is what one of the things that concerns me. And so it's like another arms race, right? Where it's a red team, blue team situation where people are going to use AI for nefarious things or to create that panopticon that we're living in. But it can also do a lot of good. But just like in the past, when we've had automation happen, that has a trickled down the productivity to everybody in the world. So we all live easier. It's maintained the oligarchy. So this is one of the things I'm fascinated in studying, and seeing where it can go, because I feel like we're rushing into it, and I don't know if we have the ethos or the collective philosophy to keep up with all of these changes.
Yeah, I agree. And for me, um, having dealt with a lot of these quote people of authority, they're neither. They're not authorities on anything. And it, have you ever been to the DMV or ever been at a restaurant or at a cash registry even, where the clerk will actually point at the computer and says, "But the computer says this," even though it's incorrect. And that experience is pointing to exactly what the danger is with AI, is that the concept of following the guidance of an authority that actually has no sentience. It does not know the difference between right and wrong. It can take reference from our text. It can take reference from any programmer, but it does not have the ability to know the difference. Now, when we run into the people who say, well, the computer says this, and you have to argue with them or discuss with them that, hey, that's an error, right? And for them, it's very, very difficult to even conceive that there can be an error. Now, that mindset, that clerk mindset, is what we have running the world. They're literally that shallow. And this is the big danger because this gives them the artificial presence of a superior authority. And you hear the people at Google used to say that they don't believe in God, but they're building one. So, in other words, they're building that ultimate authority that they'll bow down to. And in the case of modern societies, we've been conditioned since the 70s to to interchange the concept of power and authority. If you look up the definition of authority, it's um, mastery of a subject or mastery of the information about a subject, where power is the ability to subvert another's will. So when we look at, we've been taught to call people in power the authorities. Some people call police authorities. Some people call city council members the authorities. The director of a school board authorities. These are not necessarily authorities, they're people in power. Now, when AI interjects and starts programmatically determining things, a perfect example is our current standard of care system that's an IBM system named after the original guy from IBM. I'm trying to think what the name is, but it's a death panel system to give you the minimum amount of health care possible at the lowest possible cost. And when you go to ever think about this, when you go to any doctor's office that's signed up to the insurance companies, they always ask you for your social security number, whether or not you're using insurance. Now, the reason they do that is they punch in your social security number and they punch in a diagnostic code. So they get a diagnostic code by looking at a list in the ICD 10 that the computer then tells them for you what the available treatments are, and the doctor selects from those treatments. Now, if there's a treatment that could possibly help you, if the doctor's under contract with an insurance company, and maybe not even your insurance company, he can be under contract with another insurance company that you don't use, but because he accepts payment from them, he's forced to accept the narrative of standard of care. Now, that is an artificial intelligence system. It's very basic, but that's exactly what it is. And what it ends up doing is it creates a circumstance where, even though the doctor knows better, he's forced to do things that, for instance, if you, let's say that you come in and you were hit in the back by a car and it's damaged both your kidneys. Well, if both kidneys are damaged, the ICD 10 diagnostic system will tell you that, oh, you have to take a look at the prostate. So, is the prostate damaged in any way? Well, the doctor has a choice of selecting something he will get paid for, which would be prostate exam, um, a cystoscope, um, any of these procedures. Now, if the diagnostic code from that procedure is a negative, he gets paid less than if it's a positive. So today in North America, we have thousands of men who are diagnosed with benign prostate enlargement, and are receiving a procedure called a TERP, who have no such problem. What they actually have are swollen ureters from being hit in the back and having their kidneys jarred forwards. Now, the insurance companies don't give a damn because there's no billables that they can actually underwrite for treatment for that. The doctors can't get paid, so the doctors aren't going to use those standards of treatment. They're going to keep with the standard of care. And that's an example of artificial intelligence removing the intelligence of a normal person. And it's to project a narrative. Now, as they start in the concept of a technocracy back in the 1930s, when this concept was first developed, literally by Nazi German scientists, are the ones who thought of technocracies as having this ultimate system that all people would conform to. And we see that sneaking in. We see it, you must be conformant. You must be conformant. You must be conformant. Now, what we're going to see coming into the future is these clerks, like Joe Biden, for instance. He's basically a clerk. He does what he's told, and he has power, but he's definitely no authority. Now, he's given a cue card. Right now, he's being given cue cards by some crazy ass people, his staff. Well, when those cue cards start coming out of computers to determine what his next best move is, we're going to see a downward spiral to what the lowest common denominator of the programmers who wrote the software is. And that's the nature of any AI. It will always go to the lowest possible threshold of the software programmer. Now, the other night, Stormy Girl had the Dan AI talking about basketball players riding dinosaurs to save the planet and make green energy or some crap like that, and that the NBA paid for their special saddles. See, and that absurdity will become authority if we allow it. Now, to walk away from it is very simple. Turn Siri off on your phones. If you're using the Google or Amazon products, turn that shit off. It's not providing you a benefit. Saying play some song, it's making you lazy and stupid. Now, let's open it up again. That's excellent point there. And what do you think, James?
Yeah, I'm still blown away when you talked about Autech at the very beginning of when you started. I'm
Yeah,
curious
I
about
posted the
Bimini.
link to the project.
I'm
The
curious about the Bimini Road and what things could be discovered in that little part of the world off of Florida. But yeah, I think it's a challenge because when you talk about things being orders of magnitude, it puts us in a we are disadvantaged in terms of any elite group that might have access to such proprietary technology. And you know, I'll give you an example. I'll go to the doctor and there'll be a nurse taking my blood pressure, and she's not a conspiracy theorist. And I'm just making small talk, and I'll be like, hey, if there was a cure for cancer, do you think they would let us know? Every nurse I've ever talked to just shakes her head in like a forlorn way, and I don't have all the answers. I would like to think that humanity should benefit from the good things that we can do, and maybe this gets into understanding how power works. But um, I find it fascinating that we can create beautiful things. But I agree with you that there is an essence of consciousness that we've avoided, at least in traditional academic circles, because of that materialism I spoke about earlier, where many people think in this mechanical way. And I think we've taken a lot of that analog out. And I think this is important because you mentioned hyperconsciousness yesterday. And I mentioned how it felt like to fall in love for the first time. And we can have these transcendental experiences. And you mentioned driving and knowing about obstacles before they even manifest, maybe, or before other people are going to do certain things. I would like to know if you think how synchronicity plays within this dynamic, but I've always felt that there is a way that we can impose our consciousness or work with our consciousness to help shape our reality. And I'm not doing it justice by putting it in such simple terms. And I don't think a computer can do the same thing.
here's the beauty of it is you're talking about love, and this is again synchronicity. Yesterday, I put up a video of the Tesseract scene from Interstellar, and I said, listen very closely to what the guy says about his ability to determine the point in time that he was experiencing in 4D space, and his love for his daughter made him give his grandfather's watch to his daughter, and that was a fixed point in his life that he associated greatly with love. Now, as crazy as this sounds, that is the most powerful energy we can record when we do ultraspectral imaging is love. And it's absolutely bizarre when you think about it, because you think you have, heavier, more passionate feelings when you're angry or you hate or you're in fear. No, love is like freaking so powerful that it blows away any other form of energy. It overwhelms it. Now, this when people fall in love, they actually feel it, and there's a longing and a hurtfulness and it's a bizarre combination. And chemists will try to break it down. In fact, there was one who created the uh, MDMA. It's what do you guys call it? I'm trying to Molly. I think you guys call it nowadays.
It was called
Yeah.
ecstasy back in the day.
Yeah, yeah. Back in before it was called ecstasy. The without that extra nitrogen, they called it MDMA, 2,2-methyl desoxyamine, and then they added an extra nitrogen, and it became ecstasy. But yeah, that's an example. They were trying to find the chemical. Chocolate uh, causes oxytocin release in your brain. Now, oxytocin is associated with familial love or tribal, like your family, love of your family. That's where the oxytocin comes in. Intercourse causes release of large amounts of oxytocin, and when scientists were discovering or testing this stuff, they theorized that that evolved as a mechanism for the woman to maintain the man's food gathering capabilities to bring food to the children she would bear. Well, yeah, that would be true if that oxytocin lasted for 9 months to where she had the kid, but it doesn't. It's a short-lived experience. The oxytocin release is short-lived. But love actually triggers oxytocin release, not the converse. So it's something that's outside of our physicality. It's that it a lot of our chemistry in our body actually is reactions that happen due to our mental state rather than the cause of our mental state. And this is a huge thing. This happened during the Enlightenment when they were that period from what was that 1537 to I think it was 1902 was the very last time of the period of enlightenment, and there's a shorter period in there too. But in that period, they sought out totally empirical. It had to be empirical, incremental, and it had to be progressively. In other words, if you found something that was better when it was older, that was discarded as information. Even in archaeology, they did this. Incrementalism in archaeology with empirical evidence is incredible. You'll hear archaeologists say that um, this is not found within the archaeological record because it can't be entered into the archaeological record unless it fits the narrative. So again, we have the same situation with AI. Everyone's being told that AI is somehow going to become a person. Okay. Now, there's Greek mythology, and there's actually a more recent uh, the guy with the long nose. Help me out here. Anybody remember what the Pinocchio story of Pinocchio? Man makes a boy, and he's striving to be a real boy. Well, that's the same situation we're being conditioned to accept artificial intelligence in. Now, I like Cliff High's take on AI, and that Cliff puts it basically similar to what I say, because I actually worked after some of Cliff's work in 93, 94. Brilliant mind, but totally schizophrenic. And he was able to see emotional context in word phrases. And he was able to actually assign numerical values to those emotional contexts, allowing you to do charts and graphs that would predict emotional currents or emotional trends. And just brilliant because, you know, determining an emotional outcome. Well, that same early work is what's being used to do emotional inflection in these AI chatbots. Now, his take on things is same as mine as far as being small AI. Yeah, I made a device that mimics a cockroach brain. It looks for it's actually the inverse of a cockroach brain. It will move itself towards light instead of moving itself away from light. And if you've ever cut the head off from a cockroach, the body of a cockroach has organs in it that actually make decisions. And even though the cockroach has no head, it will still run away from a bright light. And that aspect, that's miniature artificial intelligence. A cricket will bury itself, just like the LSV will bury itself. So that level is fine. You use it. If you call Sam every day at 4 o'clock and it's 3:59, and you say Sam, the phone determining that that's the guy you call every day. That's useful, but it discovering every Sam you've ever known and determining which ones you liked best has no benefit. So I'm in agreement with Cliff is that it should be used uh, only only in the way that it can be a verified benefit. And asking it questions or it being your personal assistant or your personal advisor, yeah, that's not a benefit. That's acting as an authority over your life. And ultimately, materialists would love to have a programmatic way of controlling all people. They have pretty much done the people's desires and wants programmatically, but they still haven't done people's motivation or people's control programmatically, and that's what their next push is. They would love to be able to do that. Now, you were mentioning Bimini Road. Um, fun thing here because um, the cameras that I developed for the Department of Energy for the Gulf of Mexico assay back in '98. In 2008, I believe it was, they came off from duty and they were scanning the area. Um, we had side scan sonar, deep water side scan sonar that would do 2,200 feet on the same ship. And that side scan sonar picked up what seems to be artificial um, structures off from the west coast of Cuba. And a little bit farther out than the territorial waters, but still within the confines of Cuban um, governmental influence. And a German company and I believe an Italian company were tasked. The rover that they used was Deep Sea Max. That was the one that had our cameras mounted on it and had our side scan mounted on it. And they went down in 2008 and filmed. Uh, Almost looks like well, there's Andes Cross is absolutely visible, but they kind of look like um, the Iraqi style pyramids. Help me out here, James, if you can. I'm having a problem remembering what those ziggurats. The ziggurats. They kind of look like ziggurats. They're not actually like Mesoamerican pyramids or Egyptian pyramids, but more like
Like the
a ziggurat.
Sumerian ones?
Yeah, like the Sumerian ones, and they're right off the coast. They're at 2,200 feet deep. Um, I have a theory on that, and I think theories can be supported fairly well with geographic and geologic evidence that something hit um, about Cozumel, about 6 degrees over the horizon. A bolide of it had to have been ice because it wasn't. It's not still there, and caused that floor of the Gulf of Mexico to have become an impact crater. It very much looks like the floor of the crater out in Arizona, that big what?
Yucatan.
No, the one in yeah, it's on off from the Yucatan Peninsula. It goes down 4,500 feet at the lower end of the groove, and then you have a salt. It's called a haline incline, where the salt water and the fresh water off the Mississippi mixes. That jumps up to 2,200 feet. So it's been a long time since that dent in the Gulf of Mexico was made. Now, what's interesting is if you were to do a radius out from it, calculating what the ejecta would be, there is a coral reef over on the west coast of Florida, a place called Blowing Rocks in Tequesta, Pennsylvania, Tequesta, Florida. Um, that that reef area, that exposed reef, literally looks like the edge of the crater. It's got the perfect bow for it. That's the bend in Florida. You know, if you look at the map of Florida, you'll see that it has a bend in it. That's the actual center point of the bend. Now, looking south of that, we can see that there's uh, radiant fracture and there's active volcanism going across all the islands, going all the way out to the main rift, uh, the mid-Atlantic rift. And then we can see on the opposite side of the planet in the southern Indian Ocean that there's a huge area that has dropped in In other words, it would have bulged out and then dropped back in. And my personal belief is that the continent of Antarctica was closer up to Sri Lanka and was shifted south. And I placed that at about 35,000 years ago. Now, the reason why that doesn't match the quote archaeological record is the archaeological record in 1958 decided that a standard year by carbon 14 dating was the carbon 14 change, carbon 12 to carbon 14 change in a sample plate that was placed outside during the year of 1958. So that was their standard candle or their standard year for carbon 14 dating. So that's very extremely presumptive. We had, I believe it was April 20th, around 2002 or 2003, we had a solar flare. And by carbon 14 dating, everything on the surface here in Florida was 26,000 years older, just from the solar flare. Now, we had a CME actually collide with the Earth's magnetosphere right above Florida. Now, all those structures that are along there, now, there is beach rock from surf along the Bimini Road, but there's also an area that it looks like they lifted the beach rock and placed a structure underneath it to actually support the road more. And, the argument has been that it's a natural erosion feature called beach rock, where you have concretion from animals and little creatures in the sand, and it glues it all together and it becomes a piece of sandstone. But underneath that, there's supports. There's stone that is out of place there. And the same thing over at Adams Causeway between southern India and Sri Lanka. There's a deep water. Um, I'm not sure what you call that, when a back channel it's part of the Indian Ocean, but there's uh, a story that Hawaneman instructed monkeys to build this giant causeway so that he could attack Lemuria, which is the name of the continent. So we have these evidences of these things, but um, yeah, the Bahamas are cool. Now, Autech is called Avec now, has a V in the name. Back in the 80s and 90s, it was a technical, now it's a vehicular test facility. And they have a deep water habitat there. Uh, Very cool place. It's kind of like a 20,000 leagues under the sea laboratory. Um, I put up a link so you guys can take a look at the LSV work and the testing from it. It's public domain now, so there's no worries on security on that. But that's that device actually is a an autonomous vehicle, and that was launched. I want to say, I believe the earliest launch was '84, but I know the launch I worked on was '86. So, and you'll see it's a big deal. Now, since then, there's been thousands. I mean, we have autonomous fleets. We have autonomous drone systems. The X-37B, which is what replaced the space shuttle, was it closed design in 1978, and that's our current reusable space vehicle. If you ever take a look, that's actually a very cool vehicle. Kind of looks like a mini space shuttle, and it returns by itself. It puts satellites up into orbit. Um, the primary stage of the uh, Falcon 9 rocket system is actually autonomous. It returns itself and lands on its tail fins, which is pretty funny. So you guys can get a good look at some of this stuff now. And next question, any comments, anything? Anybody want to contribute in here?
Okay, Passion Patriot. On. Go ahead, Passion Patriot.
Hello. Um,
Hey, how you doing tonight?
Good. How are you?
I'm still here.
Good. Thank you for your chats. I'm very much enjoying them. Um, I I guess I have a lot of different thoughts, and I guess you said you're kind of open to anything.
Sure, go right ahead.
Okay. I'm I'm a little bit ADHD, so I might jump around, and I apologize. I try to organize my thoughts, but they're kind of a little bit scattered. Um, but I guess some of the things I was interested in, like floating by you, was I have this feeling like the Antichrist, is going to be like AI. And it kind of makes me wonder because it's like AI is so intelligent, but it's soulless and heartless. And it just feels like that's where we're headed in our current climate. And it's almost like organic life versus inorganic life, right? Like organic is like made by God, I guess. When I think of inorganic, I think of like archons and Sophia. Supposedly AI is ancient, like they had it in
Hey,
Egypt.
the Archons and uh, Sophia, mother of Lucifer, was that actually was made by God. That is part of God's creation. The difference is that they refuse to obey. They were never given free will, and they refuse to obey and hide themselves from God's grace. And
Mhm.
they are still creations of God. Now, um, on the Antichrist thing, the Antichrist is actually spelled out pretty clear that it's going to be a human that takes on the. Let's just use the word avatar because that's an easy way to describe it. It crosses a lot of different religious faiths, but the Antichrist will take on the avatar of Lucifer. So if you were to think of it as a human being completely willfully possessed by the entity, the disembodied entity known as Lucifer. So the visual impact of this being is supposed to be absolutely beautiful. Everybody will see it and think that it's stunningly beautiful. Now, we can't say that about AI. The other aspect of it is that I believe the AI are what we would think of as false prophets, in that they're soulless beings speaking. So if you take a look at the predictions of false prophets in Revelation, the revelation of John of Patmos. I'm not a Bible thumper, so I have difficulty quoting, but I remember that there's a section in there speaking about the soulless uh, presentation. And I always think of John sitting in front of a TV set. I think, you know, uh, Jesus wheels him in, puts him in front of a TV set, and he watches modern day television. Okay,
Mhm.
and describes what he's seeing in the context of a first century man. Okay, in fact,
Mhm.
even earlier than first century, because he said that his context was in the Book of Enoch. In other words, he was speaking from metaphors associated with the Book of Enoch.
Mhm.
So in that case, I don't think AI itself is the Antichrist. But I do believe, and this was the point about the divination and the Ouija board, I do believe that our acceptance of it, our permission that we give AI, is the same as giving permission to a flechette of a Ouija board that enables entities that exist around us to gain a
Mhm.
foothold with us. And I think it's the same thing.
Uh, so in my mind, like you were saying, AI wouldn't be attractive, but like if you could build the perfect human, which is what AI would do, like the art when I use AI art is some of the most beautiful art like I've ever seen. I mean, the stars that like it's absolutely gorgeous. So I picture like a human, like maybe the Vax, like merged with this.
Well,
Um,
here's a fun one for you. The trick on human beauty, and this is something that I actually when I was getting involved in Canoma and a couple other projects. Canoma was a way to generate 3D. Um, what we determined was the popularity of beauty across all cultures was the most average numerically of every culture. So when we look at the beauty of, let's say, um, a Desi woman, which would be the Hindu, Buddhist, India, Sri Lanka, that region of the world. It's the most average of that facial characteristic group that we see as most beautiful. When you look at the most beautiful woman of Afghanistan, it is an average of the Caucasian uh, group of people. When you look at the most beautiful Nubian woman, she is the most average of the Nubian of black African people. Same thing with American Indians, same thing with British, same thing all the way across all the different groups of people. And it was very cool because, like, even I think it was Benelton or it's either Benelton or Victoria's Secret actually did this studies of their models to determine which models would get top billing in
Hmm.
a programmatic way to have the widest um, association with beauty so that they could associate their product with the beauty. Now, when we think of how is this being going to be beautiful to everyone,
Right.
and that's the trick right there. Now, so if we built the most perfect, beautiful computer that was the most average of all races and all types of people on Earth, we would end up with something that is very unattractive.
Right.
And you know that that's something that's kind of interesting because that means that the perception of beauty that we'll receive is not coming from their physical characteristics, but how the entity projects itself.
Right. And I mean, I fully agree that like beauty is, definitely relative, because you've had a friend before and you looked at something, you were like, this is gorgeous, and they're like, that's horrible, like it's, different perspectives and opinions. But like the world has changed so much recently, we've inbred so much between culture, like people from China are here, people from here in Egypt. I mean, it's not like it was, 50 years ago. w- you
Yeah,
know
exactly, exactly. And it's what's fun. The uh, the diversity that we have in a human being is actually uh, we're even though the original thought was is that we would all become the same shade of gray, right? We would all become this perfect average.
right.
The opposite is happening. We're actually the uh, the span. If you think of like an Overton window is the concept of what's publicly acceptable within a society. When we look at the uh, the index for humans and what the most average human is, that that bell curve, the ends of the curve have gotten wider and wider and wider. So we
Right.
see people who are much more diverse now because we're actually um, call it interbreeding, call it whatever you want to call it, but it's we're not becoming grayer, we're becoming more distinctive, which is very cool. You know that we're
Mhm.
actually not becoming this gray concept of the I'm thinking of South Park. That's why I'm stumbling. The goobacks from South Park. You know, the future people that came to the past to get a job. They were called them goobacks. You know, and they were all gray and they looked like aliens. You know, but
Right.
just in the cranial shape of people's heads has changed. Physicality is all over the place. We have um, you know height differences that are just tremendous now. While I was in Peru, we were calling the people, the indigenous people of Peru. One of them said, "Yeah, we're demi persona. That's half people, right? In others, we're only
Oh.
half as tall as you." And it was so perfect because they're like 5'5", that's like a tall guy, so you know so we have this in I think what we're going to see in the Antichrist. um, one of my concerns was, and this is something I was thinking about, was our projections of the image of Jesus. We have this. I don't even know how to describe it. We have icons, and in Catholic traditions, I'm not talking about Roman Catholic. I'm talking about Eastern Orthodox and Russian icon traditions. They were uh, the quality of an icon was that the artist was representing a first-hand witness of either the saint or the images of Jesus that appeared to them. So that's what an icon is in a religious sense. Now, when you look at those, they don't look like the English textbooks, beautiful drawings of Jesus that we see here in the West. They look quite a bit different. In fact, they kind of some of them have a Jewish appearance because the artists were Jewish, and some of them have a more dark skin appearance in the African continent, and in Indonesia they have an appearance of almost Asian qualities to them. Now that is a cultural thing. Um, Again, I still, would they try to, would the Antichrist try to make himself appear like our images of Jesus? And I've considered that, and I'm not sure. I wonder if the Antichrist would actually appear to be female.
Right.
That,
Well,
that like a Baphomet. You know.
yeah. Well, what like so when you speak of beauty, I think one of the things that is a common marker for beauty that I've read is symmetry. Like people like symmetry in faces, you know?
Yep,
So
absolutely.
right. So like across cultures, but now you have me thinking like because this actually touches on another thing I was thinking about. I was having a conversation with some friends the other day and we were like contemplating, is God a he or a she? Right? Like or what? And I was like I don't think God has to be because he's not human, right? He's above that. So he wouldn't probably he's not in a human's body, so he probably doesn't have a sex, but he can come as he chooses to, right? Like present himself however he wants, right? So if he wanted to
Exactly. I
be
think I think with people who would, however, people would revere God the most is how God will appear to them.
like
Is
he
that
right. And so he knows. And now I'm wondering if like AI was something, could it possibly, and now with the vax and having it in their bodies, in their brains, like could it possibly do something the same way? Would that solve the problem of how could you create a false prophet that would be beautiful to everybody? And could they do that by appearing beautiful to whoever is looking at it?
yeah, they could actually. This is what Sabrina was getting at, is that the messaging of the cellular system in the body network can
Hmm.
actually be used to cause the reactions that are associated with the perception of beauty. So
Right.
that is definitely a possibility. Um,
Mm.
the technological aspect of it. Um, I think one of the issues that I have with technology today is I joke around and say that I've worked in the Jetsons and I live in the Flintstones,
Mm.
and the level of technology that we are actually at on the cutting edge is
Hmm.
so far ahead of what we got right now that um, it seems like magic to us. So I don't think that the level of technology that we're seeing or being exposed to is indicative of the actual level of technology. Does that make sense?
Oh, I 100% agree with that.
I mean,
And that's why
everybody driving around in a 1970s car saw a 19 or a 2020 Corvette. They would think that that is phenomenally more advanced, right?
Right. Absolutely.
but then they would never have seen a Koenigsegg or a Veyron. And the Veyron and the Koenigsegg are more advanced technology, only about 10 years more advanced.
Right.
See, so the
Right.
concept, how we see our technology, everybody has this concept that we're at the pinnacle of our technology. We're not even close, and it's a little frustrating for me. You can probably hear it.
No, I fully I believe that. Like I have no doubts that like we're for some reason on some kind of controlled disclosure when it comes to technology and
Oh,
we're
it's
allowed
so
things.
simple. Here's the kick in the ass is that everybody thinks it's like, oh, they're keeping the technology. No, it's the guy who puts up the money. A
Mhm.
perfect example is in '95. I visited a guy named Flinders Lee in Mesa, Arizona. He was the inventor of the brick phone, the original portable cell phone. Well,
Mhm.
he was the handheld portable cell phone. There was a bag phone before that, but
Right.
so Flinders had been working on a device that was the size of three nickels stacked one on top of each other, that had voice recognition and could auto dial 250 numbers. It used, you clipped it on your lapel like a Star Trek communicator, and it
Mhm.
would vibrate your clavicle so that you could hear it clearly. Nobody standing next to you could hear it. And you could sublingual talk. You could talk with your mouth closed, and it would pick up and allow you to make phone calls. Now, the following year, I traveled out to Harvard in Illinois, Harvard, Illinois, to work on the second floor of the Harvard. That was the Rocker and Razor flip phone factory. They spent $16 billion building this 1.4 million square foot factory. They had a
Mhm.
vibration problem on the second floor. I had them cast 2 inches of urethane over the entire floor and solved it. So,
Mhm.
but we put in 165 robotic systems in that building, and the technology to build the automation to build the three nickels phone would have cost about $60 million to supply the market with it. The
Right.
automation and technology necessary to build the flip phone and the Razor,
Mhm.
which was only incremental off from the V551, that was the original small flip phones.
Right.
Right. It was only incremental off from that. It was like 10% different.
Right.
Right. They put in $16 billion and they had to get that money back.
Mhm.
So the more advanced technology that would have made it obsolete was never released to the public.
Right.
Right.
So
That's the
you're
condition we have. Yeah.
because of money, you think?
Yeah. It's literally the people who put the money up are in a situation where they need to get at least 10 to 1 to break even. So if you come out with new technology that makes old technology obsolete, you're going to get killed because they need to make their money back in order for them to survive. So you become an existential threat to their survival. And this is the
Yes.
problem that we have with advancement of technology, is that we don't have adaptive infrastructure. And we have
Right.
a huge opportunity here. And let's do the positive bill on this too, because this is something that I really focused on over the last 20 years, is that we can leapfrog current technology because
Mhm.
we don't have the factories that build, we don't have the large capital investment in this country that built the iPhones that you have in your hand, okay, or the
Mhm.
Google phone that you have in your hand. So we don't have to pay for that technology. I'm talking about the automation machines, the equipment to make them. We can
Right.
make newer, better shit and actually get it out there faster because we have more advanced technology. But
Right.
all it comes down to is that ability to actually have a transactional system that we can keep track of who did what and what they get paid for, right?
Right. Right. So,
So
well, like,
let's let Psyche had her hand up there for a minute. Would you
okay.
like to say
Wait a minute.
say something too?
Passionate Patriot, did you get your questions answered?
Oh yeah, sorry. One just kind of led to a tangent on another, so,
Oh,
but I was
okay.
enjoying it. But
I
I
won't.
did. Thank
Okay,
you.
good. I just wanted to make sure. No problem. Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Psyche.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I just want to, first thing, I wonder how many other people, when they're on these chats, feel like me, where that concept of drinking from the fire hose, or like you have all these things that you want to say, but then you're like, okay, I've just got to try and like listen and keep up and go with it. But
That's
it
why
is,
we record them, hon. We record them so you
right.
can go back, look, and you can always ask me questions, and
Yeah,
in
yeah,
the
no,
chats too. Yeah.
right. It's just hard for me to even like think that fast. But, um, I the first question I was thinking of, like, what's it going to take? And then you started down that road of, kind of what that's the hard part, you know what I mean? Like, I think all of us feel like we want to do something, we're ready and on the edge of being able to do something, but you know I my dad
It
is
sounds like an echo from me, but
oh
um, when I start looking at inserting new technologies into channel, and I actually spent freaking better part of 20 years of my life trying to do that, beating my head against the wall. What I discovered was the barrier to entry was so intensely high, not because of the cost of what you needed to do, but because of the gatekeepers that live off from the. I'll give you a perfect example. If you were to go to Donald Trump, who's a smart guy, and if you could get into his uh, inner circle without Hogan or Dan or Eric influencing him, and sat down and explained something to him, he would be all in favor of doing something much more advanced than what he's done. However, the people that surround him have to keep the wolves at bay, and they have a knowledge filter. They don't have expertise themselves, so they rely on a couple of factors. Now, in the case of Trump, he's really old school. So if you're not a millionaire, then you haven't proven yourself in his circle. So your financial standing is about 85% of your validity in that mindset. And that's an old elite mindset of mavens of industry will rise, the cream will always rise to the top, all these slogans. But what's actually happening there in the last 40 years, and I used to say 20 years, so it's been that long. In the last 40 years, the system has been intentionally rigged to remove wealth from the United States and distribute it worldwide. And this was the goal of globalism, was to distribute the wealth of the United States worldwide so that they could implement a socialist system with a centralized control. Now, the people who have obtained great wealth during this period have done so on the extraction of wealth from this country. So if you present something that is an absolute win for this country, it's going to negatively affect their ability to extract wealth. And these people are not bright people. These are not clever, smart people. They're very manipulative people. They're very stoic people. They like to control things, own people. Now, and that's in the greater circles there. So in the case of Mar-Lago, for instance, the majority of people in Mar-Lago have earned their wealth through real estate by selling homes for more than what they bought them for. And that's fine in a growing economy, but we've had a contracting economy for the last 10 years. So the very wealthy continue to be wealthier or gain more income because the opportunities that are presented to them make it through the academics to get to them. So their palette of choices is this very narrow palette of 5 to 10 times net return on investment, immediate, no capital investment, just transactional investment. So basically arbitrage to get to the point, of so that barrier to trade that exists there is extreme. So if you build a better mousetrap, you better have $400,000 to introduce it to the public and another $500,000 of cash to place it into mass market so that somebody can buy it. So you've got $1 million in before you actually make the first mousetrap. So now you have a capital investment that you got to come up with out of your own pocket. So you're going to have to charge 4 to 5 times what your capital investment is, and then that gets marked up 5 to 10 times greater to go to retail. Now that circumstance can be easily rectified just simply by membership. You join a buyer's club. Everybody in the buyer's club owns portions of the company that builds the thing that you're buying, and all the members of the company, all the members share in the wealth in that method. And that's not communism. That's actual old-fashioned capitalism. That's what the stock markets were supposed to be. That's 1830s U.S. banking, the way that it was supposed to be before the British came in and created the Constitution 1871 and the corporation and the concepts that we have now that we deal with fiat currency and the way that money works today. If we go back to that 1830 method, and we don't have to wait for the government to do that. We don't have to have a Nasara Gasara, this happened, that happened, some savior come and help us. The only savior we're going to have is the big guy, okay? And I'm not talking about Trump. Now, the concept that we as a people, I mean, how many times do you, let's say you have a 401k, right? Do you even know what the companies that you're invested in manufacture? Do you buy from the companies that you have money in, that you own? No, most people have no clue. They just rely on a third party to determine what they're going to buy, what they're going to sell, what they own. That's why you got people like Charles Schwab assuming that you'll be happier if we just take everything from you and give you a lollipop every day with crickets in it, right? So, this is, how do we get around this? How do we stop this? This was what I sat down, I wrote up a whole freaking series of plans, tested software. We actually came up with something. And is it the only answer? No, but it's a working answer. The guys with the blockchain, they like the idea of the exchanges. They've hired us to write the exchange software that the blockchain uses. Right? We bailed on that in 2013 because there's problems with the blockchain. There's problems with cryptocurrency. And they're not basic problems. They can be turned off in a heartbeat. And that problem has to be overcome. And they're not doing anything about it because the people associated with it, people doing it, are looking at net profits on the adoption. People joining, buying Bitcoin gets more and more expensive every time somebody buys one. So the way that we get there is a common ledger. And that's what blockchain was supposed to do, is provide a common distributed ledger. So I owe you $10. Okay, you get your $10. You say, okay, I got my $10, and we put that on a piece of paper. And now that piece of paper is sealed, and that transaction took place. And each transaction is based on not the dollar, but the value. And this is something that's very distorted for people because we don't perceive value, we perceive evaluation. When you go to buy a car, right, what's the first thing you do? You go try to get a loan instead of go look at cars. You see what kind of money you can get first before you can buy that car. And you always will get less money for what you have and pay more money for what you want. And the trim difference is how these rich cats are so rich, because they're gaming us on both ends. Now, if I build you a cabinet and it satisfies your need for that cabinet, and I need a set of tires for my car, and you have a set of tires for my car, and we're not talking about barter because we're not talking about a dollar value. It's perceived value. In other words, it's not some other person telling us, oh, that cabinet's only worth $200 and those tires are $200. No. Two people together can determine what something's worth to them. That ability to contract, we have the ability to talk right now. We can negotiate. We can actually have those contract deals without buyer's remorse, without having outside influence, and be the authority of our own exchange. And when I'm saying exchange, value exchange, this for that. And I don't just preach this, I actually try to live this. I trade my knowledge, my goods, my services for things that I need. So, perfect, perfect example is a buddy of mine needed a computer. I built him a computer. He bought me a set of tires for my truck. And I don't know what the tires cost, and I don't know what the computer cost. It didn't matter. It was that equal value exchange. It was worth a computer for the tires. And that's how we have to think. That's how we'll get around the collapse of currency. We'll actually walk around this whole damn thing. Because when it comes right down to it, what's a chicken worth to you? What's a meal worth to you? And I actually went and talked to some people because I do a lot of hot rod car stuff, and it comes out that a performance engine overhaul is worth about 150 meals. So whatever the value of the meal is, let's say the meal is $20 times 150. That's the value in labor of an overhaul. That's how we need to evaluate things. So hopefully that answered the question. I rant, sorry.
No, I think that hits it pretty well. Thank you.
KB, you had your
Awesome.
hand up.
Go ahead, KB.
I'm here. Hi.
Hey, KB, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Dave. Good to hear your voice. You're going off about the valuation and evaluation, and I get that. And right prior to that, you were talking about basically I'm going to say your inventions, your understanding of blockchain, your knowledge of software, how computers work, our communication systems, and so on and so forth. And I'm just interested. I've been curious after reading so much of your posts and tuning in here. Have you ever reached out to Gavin Wentz?
I don't know, Gavin. I've never heard his name.
That's Millie Weaver's husband.
Just totally coincidentally, when we were in 2008, I took a piece of hardware that we were using for black routes. I did some nefarious stuff in the past. Okay, now black route is a secure communication system that's undetectable, and
Black
I had
yeah.
yeah. So this is dark web or whatever you want to call it, but way beyond that. Okay, big stuff like we fed Bagram its internet. Okay, so I had lines into Cuba, I had lines into freaking North Korea, like dangerous shit. So in China, of course, but a couple things I realized, and I had a change of heart about it because first off, everybody I was dealing with was a den of thieves, and to the point where if we owned something and they could steal the same thing that we own, they would steal it anyway. I was like, what the hell are you doing? We already own it. Just use what we have. Why are you stealing it? That kind of thing. And it's like, because it's a den of thieves. Now, with Gavin's thing, he's with QNX. I'm sorry, Quix, QUX. Now,
Yeah.
Which one does he call it? Is he called QUX, I believe?
He calls it QUX or quick.
Yeah. Now, he's where we were in 2019, okay, with our system. We had actually developed, I'm looking at one of them right now. We have a box like the QUX, QNX, right? I always get the two. QUX, yeah, the Quix box. I have a box in my hand, clicking the buttons on it. That's like the QUX box, and it's 40 millimeter by 40 millimeter by 30 millimeter thick, and it has an OLED display on it. And you simply plug it into your network, and it finds every other one on the internet and creates a subnet, like a dark web. Content.
Yes, I remember you bringing this up before.
Okay, now I also have for content producers, I have a small box that has a 4 terabyte drive in it, so that you would upload your videos to that 4 terabyte drive and it would distribute it throughout the entire system. I have an office level, like if you're doing e-commerce,
Hmm.
I have an e-commerce box that's about 6 inches by 6 inches. It also has a POS for point of sale on it.
Right. So very
Also
similar.
have Yeah, I also have a um, it's made by Sony. Okay, it's a Sony Xperia 5 model with
Mhm.
our software. Okay, it doesn't run Google, it doesn't run Apple iOS, and it has a full set of free software. You can use any Linux software that's available through the open source community. Will install on the phone, so it allows you to put an HDMI cable on it, use it as a laptop. You can use it as a desktop. You can put a keyboard on it and just use it as a computer.
So
Now,
this is basically the same concept.
it was the same concept, yeah. And we also have a box that's being sold called IPTV. Those Our manufacturer was able to manufacture those, so he continued manufacturing them, and those are out there. You can get one on Amazon. They're like $130. Now, the software isn't on those because we never launched the software. What we ran into is we got notified in December. We had ordered 50,000 units of each piece to launch our system. We got notified December of 2019 that uh, our fab, the guy who was putting the boxes together in Taiwan, was unable to
Yeah.
get the processors. He was unable to get the
Oh wait,
processors.
the chips and
Yeah,
processors you had trouble with. Okay.
yeah, couldn't get processors, and nobody could. I mean, we looked all over the place. India, nobody had what we needed. We needed the H5 processor, which is the Galaxy Note style
Yeah,
that's one that's used in the Galaxy Note, Samsung.
I
So
have it.
yeah, so that's the processor we were using on all of our stuff. So it really screwed us, and I was kind of down in the dumps. And then when in 2020 there, where when the country was stolen from us, I went over to Mar-a-Lago and said, I'm here to report for duty. I was over there on January 9th. And I'm saying,
Yeah.
look, guys, I've got the skill set. This is what I can provide for you. And unfortunately, and I know people get angry with me when I say this, I could see between January and August of over there 3-4 times a week that um, there were things happening, but that big plan and the white hats and all that, you know,
Was
stuff that
alerted
people
to.
believed in was not evident. Okay.
Right.
There are strange little things. Okay. There are little idiosyncrasy, type things, but nothing you could say, oh, look, that's the plan, or that's the group of guys working on the plan. Now, what I did discover was what I was talking about with the group over there. They're a bunch of guys who made money in the last 20 years. Okay, and most of
Right.
them are real estate people.
They're hovering real close to him because that's where their money's from, and they want to
No,
keep it
no,
coming
no,
in.
no. His inner circle is very tight. He has a very, very small, less than 20 people in the inner circle. And I was on the periphery of that inner circle. I was talking with Hogan, talking with Ari. I did never get a chance to talk with Dan Scavino, but I was literally talking with all these people. I talked with the DNI. I talked, you know, I met with other agency type people, all from the former, you know, administration. They weren't in the current.
Administration, yeah.
Right. Now, I still meet with those people. Okay. January, I met with the head of cybersecurity for the Federal Reserve Bank to vet our system, and it was hilarious. We had a great time. He goes, "Yeah, this shit is perfect." He goes, "This will work." And he goes, "The only problem I see is it's 30 years old." And I said, "Yeah, but your shit's 50 years old."
Oh my God, that's embarrassing.
No, I said you're the
Well,
close.
I mean, as a country,
Yeah. No, that's the Federal Reserve Bank. I'm like,
I know.
guys, you closed SWIFT for design in 1979. Come on, there hasn't
Get
been
on
any
the
update
train.
to design. Yeah. So, but the gist of it is that when Mike Lindell was talking about doing Frank, okay, I made a lot of noise, and I say, hey, Mike, I'm available for consultation, and I actually wrote him out a nice letter and showed him what I was telling him that he should do. Right, my advice to him. And one of the things is that when you do this kind of thing, you have to buy the root switch. You can't lease a root switch. You can't, and I'm talking about from the telecom end of it. If there's fiber, I buy the switch, I connect the fiber, I'm on the backbone, I'm on the root of the internet. I'm not paying somebody to have access to it.
You own. Yeah.
You're on the internet, okay? All these other, like when you buy internet from your ISP, you're on a branch and you're using the ISP's network to get to the internet. You need to be on the internet to do this kind of stuff at the top level. Now, that's easy enough to do. You can do it where I'm sitting. Actually, 3 miles from where I'm sitting is a place where I could actually do it from. Now, that aspect of it, that switch is $600,000. That's a $600,000 capital investment. It's not cheap. And there ain't no way around it. Now, the problem is that there's a lot of people who expected fiber to be delivered to every home in the United States by 1990. Okay? Well, that shit didn't happen. So they're sitting on old hardware. Like what I'm talking about is it's called a Siemens 9600 series. Okay, and it's a particular model of the Siemens switch, and it's for asynchronous transfer mode. So people listening to this want to look up, see what the $600,000 switch is. But that switch allows you to do what's called port relocation. So I can set a port that looks like it's in downtown Washington, D.C. I can set a port that looks like it's in Cleveland, Ohio, one that looks like it's at GT Central in Illinois. I can set one and have that physical device here, but across the ATM, it'll mirror the port to the other switches. So when I get somebody from Illinois, from Chicago, using my social media, let's say, and streaming videos, I'm not having to go through the whole chain. I'm exiting a switch in Chicago. See? That's the difference. Now, what happened with Mike was he didn't buy that switch. He rented all the server space. He rented the bandwidth from a broker. And there's lots of brokers out there, as I explained it, because there's a lot of people who bought these years ago to try to, corner the market on it. So these brokers will actually sell you bandwidth. Well, you exceed that bandwidth, you pay a premium. So Mike was paying $900,000 a day because he didn't buy a $600,000 switch. That's why Frank had to go from a social media site to a TV channel. Now, you take a look at True Social. True Social is a product called Mastodon, and Mastodon uses a distributed network model. So there are thousands of Mastodon servers that kids running video game servers are running Mastodon so that they can talk to each other. The Mastodon network allows truth to reflect off from those other servers in a sort of like a distributed system. The network system that we have is actually called Internet 2, and it uses the RAND Corporation Internet 2 protocol that was written by Paul Barron back in 1958. Now, this protocol, Mitch Mathewson of Tor implemented part of the protocol for the Tor network. The dark web is based off from the Tor network. What we're talking about doing is actually bringing the Tor concept, where you're tracking packets, not server sites, down to the individual cell phone level. So we have a software base that allows us to have your phone call home, tell us where on the network you are, and what packets you have on your phone. So if somebody next to you needs that packet, we send it from your phone to them. We don't go all the way from the server back to the guy standing next to you like it's currently done. So every person that joins, the network becomes faster and faster and has greater capacity.
I see now what you were relating earlier about the blockchain when
Yeah,
in your conversation on the chat with Frank and Confuzi one.
yeah, confusing. Yeah,
Yeah. I was confused about that, not to be redundant, but I get it now. I with the latency with the
yeah,
packet.
and we got down to the point where we're using something called a triple tally stick. We use the devices that they use in the uh, black box of an aircraft to
Hmm.
record data. We record our ledger on three of those that are geographically separate. So three different locations that are connected on a separate network, not the internet. So when you do a transaction, when you use a packet, we check to see whether or not you have ownership of the key for that packet. So the packet's encrypted. We see if you own the key to be able to unencrypt it. That takes 128 milliseconds for each transaction. In other words, 128 milliseconds of that 240 millisecond timeout, we can verify that you own the key to decrypt that packet and send you the packet. We also can reconcile the account in 4 milliseconds. So in 4 milliseconds, we can tell whether or not you actually received the packet.
Hmm.
Now, this is technology that I developed with TELUS in Frankfurt, Germany.
Yeah.
We use this technology for a device called a SIM bank. So we would take 256 SIM cards and plug them into a device that would create virtual SIMs that could be used out on the network. Now, the resolution time for SIM 3 is only 13 milliseconds. So we have to, from our virtual phones, and I made a device called a GeoIP8, which had 8 cell phones in a single box. And that 8 cell phones would allow us to make 128 separate channels of telephone calls on a single um, MeGo satellite link. Just a regular little 1 megabyte satellite link portable device that you would use. You know, if you they're like $250. You can buy them on Amazon. I think the
Hmm.
service is 89 bucks a month. Okay, so with these devices now in Frankfurt, the the actual GeoIP8 didn't have the SIM cards in it. It had virtual SIM. So the virtual SIM software communicates with Frankfurt, and in the 8 millisecond round trip time, we pretend like that SIM is plugged into that phone. And then the next time that phone makes a phone call, another SIM is used. So in country, when you're in North Korea, you have somebody in that country buying SIMs and shipping them back to Frankfurt or flying there with them themselves. So they're buying prepaid SIM cards, and the device allows you to run a black route.
Holy crap.
Okay, these devices work on the exact same principle. Now, with the telephones, they do something for us that's really cool. In the D-channel communications, I know this is way technical, but
Yeah, it
since
is.
the days since the days of ISDN, ISDL, uh, I forget what the I stands for, but uh, something S digital network and digital line. Internet subscriber digital network, internet subscriber digital line. Okay, so
Okay.
ISDN and ISDL had a D channel on 900 megahertz that actually communicated with the hardware on both ends to set up. Now, your cell phones, if you're on CDMA, which is not GSM, but CDMA is LTE4, Generation 4 cell phone.
Yeah.
Your cell phone has a signal that it sends back up to a server to let the server know where it's at on the network, so that when you make a request, it can route the packet back to you. Now that server that's up there is called a turn server. Okay, and it's traversal of traversal. I got to look that one up. It's TURN. It traverses the relay through the NAT networks. So it allows us to actually connect your phone to another phone. Now, if you guys are both on the same cell tower, the data doesn't have to go all the way back up to the server. It can go up to the cell tower and over to the other phone. It can go between the two phones. Now, this turn server ideally should be located at a top level domain on the route so that we can keep track of where everybody is. Just recently, we discovered that we're not going to be able to get a top level domain for another 3 years. So that was a big freaking kick in the ass for us. Now,
Yeah, I'm sure.
the side effect is I have a device in my hand, just banged it on the table. These are yeah, these are 10 millimeter by 6 millimeter by 1 millimeter thick, and they will allow us to create a DNS server, a portable DNS server that you connect your phone to. So just like having a top level domain, we'll have a local DNS server. So we're getting ready. We're going to be launching this. When we launch, when you sign up, you're going to have to sign up for a membership, and it's a non-trivial. So it's $5 a month. You get $5 or whatever the equivalent is in rupees or baht or British pounds or whatever currency you deal with. Okay, you pay tax on it. $5 a month. You get $5 worth of currency on the network. So it's a zero cost to you. We send you out the device. You allow the device to connect to your cell phone, and then it will connect to every other device on the internet. Now this creates that.
Money off of that.
We charge on a transaction. So if you buy something off from somebody, we get it just like a credit card. Now, the other part of this that we figured out, because blockchain has difficulty because it's a collectible, it's not actually currency. So the token that is your actual currency in the system is actually an account balance in a Forex sub-account. Foreign exchange sub.
Dave, all of this sounds so familiar to what Gavin has set up with Flip.
Yeah, that's why I said it was parallel. It was.
So that's the reason why I was so confused, because I've been following Gavin ever since the beginning of his announcement.
He got stuck on the hardware, and I'm almost certain the reason why he's getting beaten up is because he's relying so heavily on the hardware. And he's using a similar protocol. He's actually using Onion, which that's the top level domain that he's using is the Tor domain.
Yeah.
And so he doesn't need to use that. He needs to use something on his own because those servers are old 486s and they're sitting in college campuses all over the country. They're old. Okay.
Well,
Plus,
one
it
of the
needed
other
a
names
tracker.
that came up when I was looking into Tor Network was Jacob Applebaum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was one of the two attorneys. So Mitch Mathewson is the brains. He's a instructor over at MIT, and he's on our list to recruit. I know what he makes a year, and we can pay him almost 4 times what he makes currently. So
good.
Yeah, we're gonna recruit him, just simply for the value of the business end of it. I'm unknown. My history was erased. I was ghosted. So nobody knows who the hell I am unless they're freaking DNI, right?
Right.
You'll get freaking, I'm sorry about saying freak so much. I'm trying to stay off the swears, but a little bit aggravating because they've really messed me over. And
I can only imagine, Dave.
they do this so that
identity,
prior,
so I can't relate directly, but I can only imagine.
Prior to 92, okay, the way that they controlled us guys was they would ghost you. They would take your entire history back to your birth and remove it from the record. So you don't freaking exist. You can't get a driver's license unless you go through them. You can't open a bank account. You don't exist. You can't prove your citizenship, anything, unless you go through through them. So you're totally reliant on working for them. Okay. Now, after 92, after Hillary, every person that came in after 92 is compromised. Every stinking one of them.
How do you mean?
They will, as part of the recruiting process, they will compromise you on a felony so that they have the option of putting you in jail.
Okay.
So you're on the hook, you're trusted because they can ruin you. Okay?
After 92?
After 1992. Yep. So 93, September, I think it was September 18th, it was September 18th, is when I got my birth certificate, my identity, my passport, and my driver's license delivered to my front door. Okay?
Now, Tori has a similar story.
Yeah. No, I know. I know
She
the
had
group
so
that
much
Tori
trouble
worked
trying
for.
to get a hold of her birth
I know.
certificate.
I know people that. Well, I worked in a very similar section to Tori. I wasn't CIA, but we provided
Right.
tech support for those people. Okay, we provided network support. We provided support for them. I've never worked for an agency. My work has always been for private companies that had contracts with agencies.
And that's her story too. She never directly worked for an agency. She worked for
Right.
private contractors.
I've done
So
work
it
for
would have been
DARPA. I've done work for
circles
DOE.
on
I've
top
done
of
work for
circles.
NSA. I've done work for NASA. I've done work for, RCA, Pratt Whitney, United
Oh,
Technologies.
RCA!
Yeah.
My mom used to work for them way back.
Well, just threw up some stuff about LSV. I worked on that project.
Yeah, I know. I opened it up. I gave it my thumbs up or a flame or whatever.
Yeah. So, the whole idea that everybody's a super spy and all that, that's all freaking nonsense. Most of the guys that are operators are more like Mike Jaco, the serious guys. The
Yeah.
guys that go kill people. Okay. They're big teddy bears. Okay. But they're intense, and some of them are very dangerous. Okay. And I'm thinking of Malgato. Joseph Malgato is a perfect example. I knew this guy from stuff that was done down in Colombia, in Medellin. And Joseph went and killed Jovelyn Moisey. He shot Jovelyn, and I knew Jovelyn too. The president of Haiti, Jovelyn Moisey.
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew him 20 years ago, and his mom lives in town. So when he got killed, his mom caught me in the grocery store and told me, and it freaking about bawled my eyes out. He was a good kid, but that's Joseph. I went to Joseph's daughter's quinceañera. Like 3-4 years ago, I went to his daughter's quinceañera. It's like, holy crap, And he was a private contractor, and he worked for the Colombian CIME. Okay, that's their military intelligence for Colombia.
Yeah.
So decent enough guy, but lethal, a very dangerous person, and obviously he was in it for the money. He didn't have any conviction about anything. Because I think Moisey got, this is my opinion, Moisey, I think, got killed for not forcing the Haitians to get vaccinated. Yeah, I think the money there was too big, and that's what ended up happening. But
I'm not one of those people that can fully comprehend the things that go on in this world because there's so many people that function primarily on the thought of where their next dollar comes from.
no, it's
And
worse than that. You got guys like Biden. These guys have to pay protection money. The way they keep themselves safe is by bribing a whole shitload of people. And they usually do it through a group of, or organizational groups. Okay, these are
Dave,
criminal
I'm
crime
well
families.
aware. I lived in Delaware for 16 years.
So
Less than
the
10
reason
miles
why
from
they're
where
so
he's at.
grifty, is they're panicked. They don't have the skill set to actually make the money. They have to pay out. So
Right,
they'll
which is
beg,
like
borrow,
the
steal,
circle that
stab
you
you
were
in the back to get it.
referring to around Mar-a-Lago.
No, Mar-a-Lago is a little different. You have the drive there isn't protection. It's not criminal, and that's one thing I can say, that the people that I've met there are not criminal. Okay.
No, but wouldn't you refer to them kind of like comparing them to barnacles?
Yeah, a little bit like barnacles, but
Not
I
not
got to watch
hateful.
because I still have social ties, so I got to be careful.
Yeah.
I can't be too brutal. But
Yeah, I'm not saying it in a
and
negative way.
I
Like
say these
barnacles
things I
gotta
say these
survive
things
too.
directly to these people's face. Okay.
Okay.
So I won't. I was very highly disappointed that there wasn't that parade. Here's one that's even better because I really don't like the guy. Um, Back 2007, I was pretty close friends with a guy named George Breed, and George Breed's family founded Boston in 1502 or 1520 or something like that. Um, he receives payment from the city for the land that the city sits on. Okay, so he's a freaking trillionaire. Now, I told George, I said when I met him, it was at a function with my wife, and he had donated money to the Norton Museum in West Palm Beach, Art Museum, and we were at the function, and when he drank from his wine glass, I saw something move in the inside of his eye, and I focused on it. I got right up next to him. That is so freaking cool. He had an actual mechanism inside of his eyeball that functioned to rectify his what do they call that? The retinal. It's like when the retina starts dying, it dies from the center out. Um,
Okay.
yeah,
I can't remember the name of it, but
yeah,
I
I
know
can't
you.
remember the name
I
of
think
it.
you
So
told me
he had
this
this.
story before.
So he had this really cool thing inside of his eye, and I started talking to him about it, and um, he told me who he was, and then later that day, we got together and chatted for a while, and I said, "Look, man, I know you're rich," and I said, "I'm never going to ask you for money. I just want to know how you think." And I said, "You're an amicable guy, nice, fun to be around, and you got some really cool freaking tech, and I just want to hang out with you." So we had this real good friendship. Now, um, uh, one of the times that I met with him, he was meeting with a guy named Maury Bergemeyer, and he gave Maury Bergemeyer, I think, $70 million check for his furniture factory out in Driggs, Idaho. Maury had been building a solar community. Each house had a 2,000-watt thermal solar generator on the roof, and a very cool setup. And the company's name was Solendra. Now, if
Oh,
you remember
I
what happened in
do.
2008 with Solendra. Well,
Hmm.
Maury had transferred all of the debt of all of his companies into Solendra, and then borrowed 500 million and claimed bankruptcy.
Oh my
Okay,
God.
um, Obama, and I don't know if Maury's still alive, but Obama is who countersigned to allow that transaction. Okay, as part of the
Yeah, he
Green
did.
Energy Initiative. Okay, now the guy that Obama got paid from was a guy named Edgar Otto, who gave him $30 million for his campaign in 2008. George Breed actually asked me to work on the Mitt Romney campaign. We had a marketing company prior to that, and I came up with a plan to wrap a quote, and this was a quote. He's vanilla toast. We need to wrap him in a flag. So how do we wrap him in a flag? So I came up with this idea of creating a promotional system that would take new inventions and bring them to market that he championed. Okay, and it would pay for itself. It would cost about $160 million for the entire country. Okay, and it would generate like I forget how many, like 300,000 jobs. It was a crazy, not grandiose. It was actually hard numbers,
Yeah.
and instead they decided to spend $180 million on conventional advertising. Okay, literally like pay people, and Mitt Romney lost the election. Okay, but understand that it was the same group of people for both sides. Now, Edgar Otto owned the land underneath Sequoia, the Sequoia facility that became ES&S, that became Dominion,
Oh my God.
is is on Broken Sound Parkway in Boca Raton, right down the street from me. I worked for Panda Project right next door and ate lunch there every day. Okay, I
Dave, can
worked
I
for
just stop
Edgar.
you for a moment?
Sure. Sorry, I'm telling you like
Everything
my
is in
life
your
history.
neighborhood. No, no, no.
Yeah.
I love this because it fills in
Hey,
all
Dave,
the cracks.
I'm sorry. Can I break in here real quick? Dave, can you mute because she's echoing terribly?
Yeah, I keep
Thank
forgetting to
you.
mute.
All I was going to say is I'm absolutely fascinated by these stories. They fill in huge gaps in things that I've researched, read, heard, been aware of. I mean, we're all witnessing this playing out, and it's like this and this don't match up. So you have 2 plus 2 and equals 7, and you're just sitting there going, okay, where's the other? And you fill in all those gaps. But what I need to say, which I'm sure you'll laugh at, is how big again is where you live? Because everybody lives there. Everybody.
We live in one of the most affluent areas.
Yeah, you do.
I live in Boynton Beach. On the east side of Boynton Beach, it is a trailer court lot is $1 million. Yeah. So in this area, we have it's freaking paradise too. I'll put videos up for you guys. It's absolutely gorgeous down here. This is the best part of Florida, in my opinion, and it's the best part of the country, in my opinion. Now
And
we've been
East
here.
Coast Florida.
Yeah, it's East Coast, Palm Beach County, right along the shore. So it Mar all the way from on the north end, we have an area above Tequesta called Jupiter Island, going
Yes.
all the way south, all the way down to Fisher Island. Okay, that whole intercoastal are some of the wealthiest people on Earth have homes there. So
What's crazy
everything's
to me
close
is
in
that
here.
before your wife started the group for to expand, well, to have an art, I don't know the words, committee. There was nothing there. People didn't come into Boynton Beach, and there was no excitement. There was no visitors. It was just the people that lived there.
We were the mixed race neighborhood.
Are you serious?
The Dewey family is who created Boynton, and it was a mixed race couple who ran fishing boats out of the intercoastal here in Boynton. Now, to the west of us were several farms. The place I live at, the original property was a large farm. It was the Winchester family owned that. To the south of us was the Rayburns. To the north of us was J&R. I forget what J&R stands for. Reynolds. Yeah, I think it's
Oh, okay.
Johnson and Reynolds. Okay, where
Yeah.
the two families that own that. That's a huge farm that goes all the way up to Cuesta, and it goes all the way out to the Everglades. So all that land was owned by these farms. Now further south from the Rayburns was Yamato. Now the Yamato were the pineapple farmers down here. So
Right.
Boynton, the original guys who came into Boynton was a black guy who invented refrigeration on rail cars, and it was ammonia-based refrigeration. And where we have in the center of town, there's a place called AmeriGas, and that was the place where they added ammonia to the train cars. So on the east side, we've got Manalapan is where Rush Limbaugh lived, Rod Stewart, Don King lived here in Boynton. Um, on the west side of the intercoastal, it's everywhere from ultra wealthy to upper middle class. The farther west you go, it goes more and more middle class. You get out to the Belglades, and there's some pretty bad poverty out there. Okay,
Yeah.
but in close here, it's a very affluent area, and we have a large black community in our area that's affluent. We have a large Haitian community in our area that's very affluent. Haitians are. We used to laugh because people think Haitians are all like the guys you see in Port-au-Prince.
Yeah.
No, the number one car in Haiti is a BMW 7 Series. You
Yeah.
know, they're upper middle class. So
Well,
that
people know what
aspect
they
of
see
it,
on the
you
news.
get right, and that aspect of it, you get to meet everybody because you live in the neighborhood. Like Don King used to eat at a Italian restaurant that we like to go to, and at Joseph's over on Woolbright Road. You have the Trump family eats at the Italian joint on Southern Boulevard. The when I go to business meetings, most of the times it's in flip flops. Okay,
That's all.
yeah, it's a different culture completely, and it's
Yeah.
not that formal thing like New York City, which we've done that, but you don't need to down here. And yeah, Monday I'm going over and I'm going to meet with somebody who's worth $20 billion. Okay, yeah, I'm going to do a site assay for. He wants me to do some other work too, but I don't know if I'm healthy enough to do it. But I'm going to go over with my work boots on because it's a job site and take a bunch of 3D photos of some stuff I need to do an assay, a measurement. So that's the kind of stuff that you run into, and Tommy um, is a billionaire, and you have up on the north end Lawrence Moans. That's the Moan Faucet Company.
Yep.
He's a billionaire. 2 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, went over and met up with Matthew, who's the former section chief for North Africa for the CIA.
Oh,
And
wow.
with him was one of my peers from when I worked at Motorola. He continued in the French agencies. A guy named Frenchie, that's his nickname. And a guy named Robert Olson. Now, Robert Olson is freaking worth $3 trillion. So you got a bunch of guys sitting around talking about prostate problems because we're all in our 60s, right? Smoking cigars. That's literally how it is. So,
Yeah, because life is still life.
yeah, and it's the I'm freaking broke, right? But I talk to everybody the same. So it's I don't have an issue with them being wealthy. They're okay, good. I can do that too.
Well, listen, you may be broke now, but hopefully after this, after your contraption, I'm going to put it that way, comes out and everything, things will pick up. And our prayers are always with you, Dave. I look at you and I think to myself, how are you still going? And if he's got that and he's still doing all of this and his brain is functioning at this capacity, I've I've got work to do.
That aspect of it is, I was joking about it, and it's kind of freaking horrible. But 2017, I had a really bad health year. So in January 2017, I had encephalitis. Okay, half my freaking brain was covered in pus. Okay,
Holy
brutal,
shit.
so fucking pain. I'm sorry for swearing. So painful.
No.
So painful you can't imagine, okay? Standing for like 3 hours at a time in the shower, scalding hot water, trying to get relief from it. So my brother, I have two brothers that are doctors. My youngest brother gave me clindamycin. And I took a full course of clindamycin, lost a layer of skin, had hives head to toe from taking the crap, and it killed the infection, okay? I go over to Cleveland Clinic, and I'm trying to report the fact that I had encephalitis, and I don't know if it was bacterial or viral, but it must have been bacterial because the clindamycin cured it. And I asked to have an IQ test and check my freaking brain out because I could tell differences. Like I was like here tonight. You heard me forgetting a few things. Now, when I was a kid, they tested my IQ at 210. I had my IQ tested in 2017. This ain't bragging. I lost 30 points. I'm at high 270s, low I'm sorry, not 270s. High 170s, low 180s. Okay, so I'm still in the upper 2% club, but um, the Cleveland Clinic people didn't want to report to the CDC because they didn't diagnose it. I come in with all the documentation, everything, they pulled
Yep.
fluid out of my brain, everything to verify what what the bacterial infection was, but they wouldn't report it because they
Because
didn't
they don't
diagnose it.
own it.
Right, and that was the only infectious disease authorized report for the CDC in our area. Okay. Now I'll throw the picture. I've got scans in my head with freaking half my brain
I
covered in
can't
pus.
believe the things that
So
you have survived and the fact that you're sitting
hell,
here
I'm
with
supposed to
us
be
to
here.
have this
Yeah,
conversation.
yeah.
There is
There's no
no
doubt.
doubt that there is a God and that you have purpose.
Well, I'll tell you something even funnier. So Confuzzy has his partner's sister or mother was severely ill, and they went to this experimental surgeon. And this guy happens to be a guy in Europe who was doing testing on a basket device. Now, I need a surgeon to go in and remove scar tissue from my arterial, my kidney artery.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've been looking for a doc to do this. So he gave me this guy's name. Now, totally freaking coincidental. Okay, got a buddy named Guy who was working on the blood filter with a guy in Europe, and Guy was sponsoring this Romanian guy that we bought some artwork from. Okay, now turns out Guy's partner is the guy's name that he gave me. Total freaking synchronicity. Okay. So,
Yeah, but that always happens with you.
Tuesday, I'm calling a guy to say, hey, like I say, God talks to me. It's freaking bizarre.
And listen, since you've come into my world, I've had a bunch of them.
Yeah,
Because we
and
started.
I don't know what the hell. I don't know what the hell causes it. What the hell the deal is. But obviously, I'm here for a reason, and hopefully, I fulfill that reason to God's glory. Right.
Yeah. Well, you've brought me in and taught me a lot. And it all started when you brought up the Worcester.
The what?
The Worcester.
Worcester.
The Worcester School? Yeah, well,
Oh.
I say it with an Irish accent because that's where I learned it from. My
Sorry,
Irish
I'm
grandmother.
laughing over here. Yeah, you're talking about Worcester, the medical college over at Penn State. Yeah, the first ones with a
But
computer.
my grandmother would say it with an Irish brogue, and she would say it's the Worcesters. And so whenever I went to go look it up, I always typed it out phonetically the way that she said it, and I could never find any information. And then just so happened that I was browsing through some of the stuff that you had posted, and I was like, wait a minute, like the old rich family from Philly. And then I said that she used to be their chambermaid, and then you said you got kicked out of your house because of the issue with the chambermaid's daughter. That's all she wrote.
You tongue-tied him, KB.
Must have. Dave never
No,
speechless.
I'm over here laughing because my
You guys, we've got
my early
I
teenage.
want to drop. We're 10 past, which is fine, but we do have two other people in line still.
Yeah, we'll get to them here. So fun on this. My early childhood in 1970, I was exposed to Jim Channon. Jim Channon was a hardcore hippie, and I think my proclivity as a child. I was 14 years old, and I was interested in girls in the way that a man was interested in girls, and I think that was probably. I look back on it now, because like I'm teaching this 18-year-old kid, and he's still at the point where he's just now starting to look at dating, and he's not. And I was aggressive towards women back then, and women, not children, women, and I was trying to rectify why was my early teens, why was I like that? And I realized that, yeah, well, I was freaking 8, 9 years old, and I'm seeing people without their tops on in the hot tub, and all kind of debauchery. So definitely influenced me, and I didn't realize that it did until just recently.
Wow.
So
Well, we love you.
I posted a picture of my brain up there. You'll love this. Take a look up on the channel. You'll see it.
Okay. Next person, I'll mute myself now.
All right, Jeff Maruski, go ahead.
Hey, Dave. Totally
Hey Jeff,
fascinating.
how you doing?
Good, good. You're a totally fascinating guy. Um, I got about 2 or 3 questions. I keep adding more to my head. I want to ask you about William Tompkins. Do you know anything about William Tompkins?
Man, that name is so familiar. Um, Trigger my memory. What the hell?
He was a Navy guy built who built ship models, etc. And anyway, he had a lot to do with the UFO stuff, and he actually worked for NASA. And I was hoping you would recognize him, so I didn't have to explain this. But anyway, I was interested if you had any knowledge of him. He's a very interesting guy.
Dave, he's got a bunch of videos that float around online where he's talking about all the work that he's done with what are those aerospace companies?
Right.
Yeah, I know the name, and like I said, I lost a little bit, but um, I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think when I might have ran into him because I did. We transferred the NASA stuff, all the old telemetry and the photos and everything. We scanned all that stuff and transferred it over to National Archives and indexed it all. So I may have run into him during that period. Um, yeah, no, I'm not. I can't say that I know any of his recent work. I'm not a big social media
No,
guy either. I'm here on Telegram. Yeah.
I think he recently died, but yeah, he had a very interesting history. And Tori talked about him a bit, and I looked up some of his videos, and he talks about how when we went to the moon, they actually saw the aliens and had a conversation with them. It was very interesting.
Oh, great, great, great. Okay, so here's what I know about that. The the alien conjecture. There are um, artifacts on the moon. There are structures on the moon. The freaking problem is that the structures are so large that it best way to even breach the topic is uh, Stan Lee from Marvel Comics has recently put out a movie about celestials and eternals. The archetypes that he's showing you is the scale of the creatures we're talking about, the people that were here on Earth prior to us. And I know a lot of religious people get upset by this. Go look at the Nag Hammadi. There's the hypothesis of the Arconans. Talks about the people that were here that actually helped God make humans. Okay, and it's not Zachary Sitchin's Enki and Enlil. It's a different circumstance. Now, from what I've seen, those people that left artifacts on the moon, there were two groups. The first group is so freaking incredibly large that it's mind boggling. We're talking about creatures that may have stood as high as 1,400 feet. Now, are they humans? I believe they were created by God. Okay. But um, I don't believe in the alien hypothesis because I know where the alien hypothesis came from, and it came from the same group of people who came up with the global warming hypothesis, and that was the Iron Mountain group back in 1958 to create circumstances that would allow the industry of the United States to continue during peacetime. And I'll post that in the. You guys can read it. They claim this is debunked. Bullshit. It's not debunked. My dad owned the property where Iron Mountain is, and this did happen, and it was refuted back in 1968. So when Kennedy chose the option to explore space, there was a lot of resistance against it because it required refit and recapitalization for most of the factories that supplied NASA. Now, really interesting part. My dad worked on the Minuteman project, and he was a screw buyer for Bethlehem Steel. So, as a little kid, we traveled. The whole family would take vacations to go out to these facilities like Nenock and the missile sites, and we got to go down into the missile sites and all that, for the little tours. But one of the things that he did was he developed the metallurgy. He was a metallurgist at that time. He was a metallurgist, but he developed the metallurgy for the thin section bearings that are used in the wrist and wrist, elbow, and shoulder joints of the NASA spacesuits. So we were at the Cape here in Florida when they were constructing the prototypes for those. And me being a smart little kid, I was like, this was glory, right? Like I said, living in the Jets, working in the Jetsons and living in the Flintstones. Well, I asked the docs that were working on this stuff, where did you come up with the idea of those layers? Because they had layers of silk in the pressure suits. And the original pressure suits didn't have that. They were conformal, and they would expand them, and the people couldn't move when they were full pressure. But the NASA pressure suits are made with layers of silk. Well, they told me the story of Jade Rabbit. This is a Chinese story about Quan Di, who traveled to the moon in a rocket-powered chariot. And that while on the moon, they had to wear special clothing, and they described the clothing. That's what NASA replicated, was the description that's in Jade Rabbit. Now, damn, right? There's artifacts on the moon that have Chinese markings on them. There's artifacts from the Lunas Soviet lander that included bodies. There's artifacts that are scaled with doorways at 35 foot tall, and there's artifacts that are, they would have had to been made by somebody as big as the Celestials and Stan Lee's stuff. They're freaking enormous. You got a basically it looks like a Quonset hut, like a corrugated Quonset hut.
Mm-hmm.
That's the opening of it's 2 miles wide. It's 3 miles deep. It's on the surface of the moon.
What?
Yeah, yeah, and there's all kind. If you go up on NASA site and look at there's all kind of theory documents about tangential meteor hits, tunneling this thing, or it's they've tried to come up with a normal way of explaining it, and they cannot explain it. The other aspect of the moon is that the moon has a gravitational field that should require it to be, if it was rock, it would have a specific gravity for the size that it is. The gravity that's on the moon is incorrect for the ringing sound that the moon makes when it's struck. Now, they went back and they retested that, I guess back in mid 2000s. They dropped a payload onto the surface of the moon to see if it rang, and it does ring. There's actually, it rings like a bell. So those aspects of it, and at the same time, in the 1970s, they were doing radio telemetry, and this was what the secure part of this was, that we've been able to do radar tomography, actually develop three-dimensional images off from radio systems. Okay, now radio tomography, it's still used for deep penetrating radar for seeking underground deposits of oil. They use it in Afghanistan to try to find, or not Afghanistan, but Iraq, to try to find domes and things like that. Now, while they were doing scans of Mars to try to determine why there's this 400-foot wall right at the equator towards the southern hemisphere. The southern hemisphere is 400 foot smaller in diameter than the northern hemisphere. Phobos pass in front, and they scan Phobos, and there's a monolith on Phobos. There's a monolith on Mercury, and there's a monolith on Callista, just like the movie 2001, Space Odyssey movie. They're 1 mile thick, 4 miles wide, 9 miles tall. Miles, and these are artifacts. So, are they alien? Well, they're not us. Okay, they're not Homo sapiens sapiens, Homo florensis, Cro-Magnon, or Neanderthal. Okay, there's something else.
Why don't they
So
just
we,
tell us?
because it breaks religion. When they talked about what if we found an alien civilization, this is actually in the Iron Mountain report too. If they found an alien civilization, who would be greatest affected? Well, it's academia. Well, who controls the distribution of capital in our world? Is academics. They don't control the capital; they control the gateway for the capital. Now, academia is based on authority of a known subject. So if that known subject turns out to be a falsehood, then their authority disappears. So it creates a knowledge filter. And anybody who would explore this, like I'll be called, wacko, I'll be called all sorts of names and try to be discredited and everything else just for mentioning it.
Yeah.
And yet all I'm saying is this is my opinion. Now, what I've seen a lot more than most people. And actually, I'll publish some stuff probably tonight or tomorrow. I have a collection of videos I grabbed off from YouTube, so they're public domain. Um, there's 9 hours of Google Earth ancient artifacts on Earth. And once you get your head around the scale, it's like, oh my. Whoever built those are freaking huge. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it's global. Now, in my opinion, that society disappeared around 35,000 years ago. Not millions, and I don't think that the KT boundary was 65 million years ago. That date was drawn off from the idea of dendritic measurements of tree rings and the concept that layers of soil would have a similar progression. So when archaeologists dig something up, they date it to the layer that it's found at, and then they confirm that by finding carbon-bearing objects around it and dating the carbon-bearing objects using carbon-14 dating. Now there's a molecular trace that measures the decay of uranium that leaves scintillation marks in quartz. It's called atomic decay aging or atomic decay dating. That method has shown some of the sites to be 250,000 years old, and people lose their careers because they claim it. The whole thing is set up for this 1850 concept of incrementalism and of Darwin evolution. So we can't have a more advanced thing in the past. Right now, we have people that talk about Tartaria, and they use Chicago World's Fair as an example of Tartaria. When you go out, you can go out to the meadows there. You can go out to the where all the crap is laying there, and you'll see that it's slapped together with plaster. This wasn't grandiose stuff. This stuff was made to last for a couple of months. It's really a facade. The building I'm going to on Palm Beach is a perfect example. I'll throw some pictures up of the interior of that building. The entire building's having to be restructured from the inside out. It was built in 1927 after the hurricane of 1926, and it used the rubble of the hurricane to build this fabulous, grandiose, historic building in downtown Palm Beach, right? And it's made of stacked rubble. It's literally nowhere near what we would build something today. So when people say they look at the Chicago World's Fair and say, well, how could they build something like that? Well, it was all plaster. Literally was like a facade. So once you go out there and you actually look at it, because I believe that stuff too. Now, the sunken cities and all that, there's a lot to that. Now, you take London, for instance, it's got 2 levels beneath the street level. that was at street level in the past. So some kind of flood came across in our recent history. And I agree with that. Now that wasn't global though. So back to the moon, we have this situation where we have a crow that is white. That means all crows are not solely black. So for academia who claim that all crows are solely black, that white crow can't exist. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, I got two quick ones. All right. Is there an alternate or free energy? Is it available to us now, or are they hiding that? And also, what kind of 3D printer do you have? That's two questions that I have left.
Okay, so free energies. One of my company's names was Graphite Blue Energy, and Graphite Blue Industries, Graphite Blue Research, and Broadmine Energy. So we developed over 200 products in the energy sector using technologies that were considered fringe technologies. Um, Over unity, as defined by current academia, um, it's not over unity. So, for instance, we developed a cavitation heater from 1940s technology. A small little device runs on 180 watt regular motor. It's not even a permanent magnet motor, it's a regular induction motor. Um, it produces 4,500 watts worth of steam, but it doesn't heat the water the same way that a conventional thermal electric heater would heat the water. It heats the water through cavitation. So 180 watts in, 4,500 watts out. Yeah, that's what today people would call free energy or over unity. Now, my wife's father and her grandfather were the electricians for George Westinghouse, another total synchronistic thing. Um, they built all of Tesla's equipment. So if you take a look at Radio City Music Hall, the lobby has a beautiful chandelier and copper railings and copper uh, finishings all over the lobby. The top of the lobby is the top of a resonant cavity, and there's a copper cap on it. There's a mid rail that is a coil, and there's a kickboard on all the floor panels around the bottom that make up the bottom coil. This resonant cavity has kept those lights lit without electricity since they were installed in 1926. Okay? So there are technologies out there. Tesla did have technologies. One of the things that father-in-law talked about was um, shown in the movie Prestige, which was the idea of you can have two resonant surfaces and separate those surfaces. So if I create two resonators that are perfectly tuned, it will cause the surface interaction to become coupled. And the distance between the two sides of the two resonators, the two outer surfaces, is in space-time is zero, because the communication between the two resonant surfaces in the coupling is, it has zero space time. So there's zero space, zero time. Now the offset, because the Earth is moving, it's not swimming on the back of a turtle. Um, the Earth is actually moving, causes whatever enters the field on one side to be displaced in space-time and exit the other side. So the distance between the two sides of the field demonstrated in Prestige is about 38 feet. Okay. Now, just recently, November 30th of 2022, the folks over at D-Wave talked about tunneling um, particles through their couplings on their systems and creating an Einstein-Rosen bridge. If you take a very close look at the design, the actual field that it generates, and take a look at Tesla's patents on uh, sending energy wirelessly, you'll see that the exact same fields, the exact same resonant fields exist. Now, why don't we have that? We do have that. but we don't have it in the form that Tesla envisioned. When you use a cell phone, that transmitter on your cell phone is a maximum of 5/8 of a watt. The cell tower has a maximum, if it's up in the air away from people, it has to be 60 feet away from people, it can go as high as 12 watts. The distance that your phone is away from that cell tower, 2.4 gigahertz, is way farther than just simple amplitude or frequency modulation would allow the signal to transfer between the two. What you have going on there is co-resonance. Your cell phone resonates at the same exact frequency as the cell tower. So that radio link has virtual parity or capacitive action. So pressure on one side of the plate exists on the opposite side of the plate, giving you uh, um, a time-space differential on electrical charge. And this is how electrical charge can travel through space. This is how solar wind that propels particles off the sun. I'm talking about positive charge particles off the sun. This is how it works. So we have this stuff all around us, but academia, again, will refuse to accept it. There's a device called an electret that will actually use that solar wind in the Earth's magnetosphere to rectify and condense uh, electrical potential into a capacitor, allowing you to use it. It's not scalable, so it doesn't. It's relatively it doesn't have much function. You get a good spark out of it, and that's it. So all of these things are types of technologies that are free energy type technologies. Now, I worked with a guy, his name is Philip Telbert, and Philip Telbert developed the strontium-90 battery for the U.S. Navy back in the 70s, and he developed the flashlight that you saw in Jurassic Park. That wasn't a prop; those actually existed. Strontium-90 batteries are extremely toxic and hazardous to manufacture. Phil hired me in 2014 to develop a enclosed, safe, automated manufacturing cell. So that device produces 3 kilowatts for 1 gram of strontium-90 for 28.8 years. Cost per cell is around $9 in quantity of 5,000. So for $9, you can have a 28-year supply for your house. That's the reason why that's not on the market. Now, the other engineer that Phil had working for him is a guy named Bruce Parsons. His father or uncle, I think it might have been his uncle, was Jack Parsons, the guy, Aleister Crowley's boy toy. Bruce Parsons and I keep in touch. Bruce Parsons developed the method of printing magnetic domains onto a Searle motor. That's the rotating magnet motor. The flux gate that you've seen people use for alternative energy stuff with magnets. Magnets take way too much energy to charge. You never get all the energy back out. Okay, so like the Parandev motor, it's a net loss in total energy. Um, but Bruce's work on spintronics, and the reason why Philip died was his senior engineer before him put strontium-90 into the dielectric of the Searle motor, and on a 6-inch device, it went to 1 megawatt and did a runaway in the bench in the laboratory, and actually vaporized the strontium, and the strontium circulated throughout the entire building. So the guy who was running the experiment died right away. Phil, it took several years for him to die, but he eventually died from heart damage due to the strontium. I'm currently radioactive with working with the stuff. I'm 300 ticks per minute, but I do a bunch of stuff to mitigate that. Now, all of these technologies are real. They exist. A lot of the stuff you see on YouTube is misunderstanding of actual science. This is empirical stuff. You can actually measure, taste, touch it. Now, the combination of the two means that people who explore areas that aren't well known yet tend to be labeled fringe and have a bitch of a time getting funding. You also have people that become delusional and they'll see more into something than what's actually there. Bodini coils are an example of that. You'll hear people talk about cold energy and cold magnetic flux and all that. What they're looking at is something called Peltier effect. It's the effect of magnetic flux flowing through a substrate, and you get a, a heat pump action out of it. Now, the type of printer I have is I bought the cheapest Corality 3 that I could possibly find, and went ahead and did major improvements to it myself. I just set it up for printing carbon fiber, um, where I've done printers since the early 90s as part of automation. First one I did was called Camelot. It did underfillment for ball grid array processors. You know, the processors like in your phone, and we put the glue underneath the processors with it. But I have a box, 24-inch cube box in my office that'll go to 110 centigrade, and the table surface is still 235 by 235 millimeter. By I think my height on that is 600 millimeter. It's pretty high. No, it can't be 600 millimeter. I think it's like 10 inches. So it's what 250 millimeter. Yeah, something like that. 250 millimeter height on it. The filament that I use is an off-the-shelf carbon fiber filament. You print it really hot, and then you go ahead and you scintillate it. So I stick it in the microwave. I have a microwave oven with heat brick in it, and you make it slightly larger than what you need, and you zap it. You bring it up to 3,000 degrees, and it'll actually scintillate. So you can print metal, you can print carbon fiber with it, but you got to print at 110 degrees centigrade air temperature. So hopefully that answered everything. A lot of tech there, guys. Sorry.
Hey, thank you for your thank you for answering. You're a fascinating guy. I wish I had more time to drink a beer with you, but very
Hey,
interesting.
thank you for coming out, man. You can always ask me anything, anytime.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jeff. Okay, we'll finish up with Raven Bates. Go ahead, babe.
Hey,
Hey
Raven.
guys, can you hear me? Hey, how you doing? Um, yes, damn. I came in kind of late to this, but yeah, your conversation with KB, you guys were talking about such interesting stuff. My question kind of seems boring now, but um, two questions, and I know we're kind of getting past the time, so maybe we can talk about or carry this conversation to next week. But first one was in terms of you've mentioned Iridium communications before. The way I knew about them was I was researching SpaceX. They had launched a rocket and of a bunch of Iridium communication satellites. So I looked up Iridium communications and I realized, oh, they've been trying to make a satellite constellation since like 1990s. And then the military bought up the company, and it kind of just became a front for military intelligence infrastructure, and then maybe SpaceX and Starlink is
You know who
kind of
owns it
just a
now?
continuation of that front.
You know who owns Iridium now? Is Lufthansa, the airlines. They use it for in-air internet access. The original Iridium, the 66 that were originally launched, were for a project called Global Communicator. Um, the Global Communicator took place as something that existed in 81. Um, in the early 90s, I want to say, uh, well, it went online 90. Oh crap! It went online earlier. It went online 83 is when the first ones went up. Um, in the late 70s, they put up Hermes, and Hermes was the first constellation that was three 900 millimeter lenses. These are flying 900 millimeter lenses. So if you can imagine a yard wide lens, and it's kind of funny because sightings of Hermes have also been called the triangular aircraft. You know, it's Hermes 2. It's the satellite constellation. It's called Hermes 2. But that was a Navy surveillance satellite. It used slow scan, I'm laughing because it's such old technology. It used slow scan, shortwave radio, um, television, uh, not even CCD. It was the old three tube color television systems like you used to see in the in the studios of the 1950s. That's what's inside those satellites, and they look at the Earth. Now the three of them give you frames of capture. It's about 6 frames per minute, and a piece of software that I actually worked on in the early 90s called Canoma allowed you to develop three-dimensional mapping out of those images because we knew the relative position of the satellites. Now, when Iridium came out, Iridium's blind. It's a radio-only system. They're very small. After Iridium, the launches have been a system called NRL, Navy Research Laboratory, photovoltaic radio antenna modules, NRL PRAM. And I actually have one of the heat sinks. It's a graphene, eighth inch thick piece of graphene um, heat sink, 11 inches on a side. That's the size of the satellite. So in between the solar cells on one side and the electronics on the other side, we put this piece of carbon, this pure carbon, single chunk, makes one crystal. And it's the piece I have has a cracked corner. That's why they gave it to me. They said, you can take this home because you can't use it for anything. But NRL PRAM has a 1 kilowatt laser on each of the modules, and it's targetable within a 35 millimeter radius with a 10 millimeter diameter beam on the surface of the Earth. Now, they act as a constellation, so 100 of these could provide a million or a megawatt of microwave energy on a 10 millimeter circle. So literally, um, SDI, the Strategic Defense Initiative of Ronald Reagan. Um, there's also 1981, we finished launching the last of MERV, which was the multiple reentry vehicle system. And the MERV heads were the nuclear component of the MERV heads was removed through various space shuttle and X-37B missions since then. But they contain 1,000 pound tungsten telephone pole like things. They kind of look like an arc rod if you've ever used a TIG welder. That's what they look like. They got a sharp point on them, and those deorbit at 17,000 miles per hour. So when they hit the Earth, they penetrate 6 miles. So they're they're freaking core busters. They're incredible amount of kinetic energy. So in constellation satellites, that's the array that's currently in use today. And I probably broke some security crap, but who the hell cares? They come kill me, so what? Um, the the coolest thing is the NRL PRAM. The way that it was put forward was the idea that we would have solar cells, cadmium arsenide solar cells in orbit. Those are the ones that are very efficient, that last for a long time, that don't contain indium on the surface, and don't degrade. The shit that the Chinese are selling ain't the same thing. Okay, space solar is different than Earth solar. The NRL PRAM, 1 kilowatt, 11 inch by 11 inch solar cells that are put up in orbit could supply North America with all of its power needs if they finish the constellation. I don't believe that'll happen because they're too valuable as a weapon. So I'll throw a link up for NRL PRAM so you can take a look at what SpaceX has been putting up.
Oh yeah, wow. You're so knowledgeable about that stuff. And yeah, those I guess that's basically the rods of God type tech that you were kind of describing there. And also
Yeah,
I know that
that was the refit for MERV. MRV. It's 1981 was the close of MERV, and it became Rods from God.
and then also with everything going on in Turkey, I mean that earthquake, it definitely seems like it was artificially amplified. Like it kind of came out of nowhere. And I mean I know that there was, I think it was, what it was it NASA or someone was shooting radio waves at Jupiter and the moon and having them get reflected back to Earth, and then Tori posted this video clip of this guy talking about how they would, send radio waves into the earth. They'd get back to tone and be like, oh, that tone's natural gas. So this one's crude oil. And they could, map out the vibration of everything from the feedback. And then he went on to elaborate, like, you could, use more energy and basically create an earthquake. Um, and then also paired with that the woodpecker Russian weapon systems and all. I mean, Jesus, what we're capable of now. It's almost it's kind of gives you anxiety to think about. But then also that circles back. It's funny you talked about the immortal or the Eternals, Stanley Kubrick, because I hadn't heard about that until earlier today. I see a guy talking about that on Instagram and about how it correlates and relates to like Thoth and Atlantis, 35,000 year ago culture that got wiped out and the Emerald Tablets and all that. And so I was just looking at that today, and then you mentioned it just now, this chat. And then also, so yeah, so that was my other question, is that there seems to have been some kind of extinction 35,000 years ago, some kind of cataclysmic event. Then another one about 12,000 years ago, like Younger Dryas, and then now it's seeming like, and I think you basically agreed with this, that there was something more recent, and then you mentioned it being regional, and that's like the mud flood in the London and the why they have these sub levels and all these I don't know if you know about Paul Cook, but Paul Cook goes around England, London, the whole UK, and he just finds these structures that are fenced off and purposely buried, and they have like trees planted on them to just hide them from the general public's view. But it seems like there was a more recent something happened, like I don't even know when, like prior to 1000 AD, almost, and then
Actually,
yeah,
it's more recent than that. In the 1880s, there seems to have been something that happened. Um, if you do a quick Google search on orphan trains, something happened in Europe that was catastrophic. I happen to have gone to the catacombs in Paris, and I know a little bit. I'm not proficient to say that, but I studied a little bit of geology and I studied a little bit of anthropology as far as looking at human bodies that were dead. And the bones that are there are not from the Black Plague. They're from something that happened within 100 years from when I saw them. I saw them in '93. So that would put them, about 100 years before that would be sometime around the 1880s. So the Paris catacombs are part of the thing is that the leg bones, and this is something I always look for, is the leg bones are scaled to our height today, the 6 foot height. So you have typical femur is between 18 to 20 inches long. Okay. Um, in in the turn of at the beginning of the Dark Ages, where these bones were supposed to come from, the average height of a person in Europe was under 5 foot tall. 5'2" is a very tall person. And the chroniclers, the Spanish chroniclers who came to the United States, well, it wasn't the United States, but to Americas back in the 1400s, chronicled the fact that how much taller the people here were than them and how tall they were and their weights and everything. That's the stone weights of the British and all that. So uh, the people that would have been indigenous in Europe at the time that they claim that the Black Plague happened would have been way smaller. The other thing is that at the time that the Black Plague happened, the dietary restriction, it was common for the king to own all livestock, all meat. And porridge and polenta was the primary food source for Europe at that time. And in Eastern Europe, polenta is still the primary food source, which is basically a rough form of bread. It doesn't use yeast. Basically, cook up ground wheat and ground um, what would you call
Is it
grains? Yeah,
multiple brain?
yeah. So the food source at that time, plus the fact that there was rampant syphilis, there was rampant tuberculosis in Europe at that time. You don't see that in the bones. Now, if you see syphilitic bones, even modern syphilitic bones, um, that disease it is incredibly destructive. So every joint is just totally trashed they look like wormholes going through the joints. It's like, if you ever seen a piece of lumber that termites have gotten into, that's what syphilis looks like in a dead body. Now, that's not evident in the catacombs. Now, they claim that there's areas of the catacombs that it tests positive for syphilis and it tests positive for the bubonic plague. I didn't go near that, so I can't say, me, that's like me. No, I'm not going to chance it, I'm not a germaphobe, but yeah, I know that's bubonic plague. I don't want the pustules all over my body. So, yeah, I think there was something that happened around 1880. You have something called phenylketonuria. Um, this genetic malfunction comes from eating ergot that was in spoiled mash in Ireland. And very great movie. Lorenzo's Oil covers uh, how they figured out to use rapeseed to prevent PKU from destroying brain tissue. Rapeseed oil will actually prevent it from hurting the kids. Now, PKU is an Irish descent only, and its origin was in the ergot poisoned grains of Ireland. Now, that's around 1880 at the same time, which there was the potato famine, and they were eating sour mash that was polluted with ergot mold. So, you know, as far
Okay,
as
yeah.
time period,
Yeah, so then, okay, following up on that, because yeah, the Irish, the whole potato famine thing seems like there had to have been something else going on. Couldn't have just been like, should they really been that reliant on potatoes? And then with all this weird obscurity about the 1800s, in terms of the orphan trains, I've seen a few videos on that, and the theory that from what I've watched, it seems to be that there was some kind of catastrophe, and that these orphan trains were basically the ruling powers trying to repopulate the lands as fast as possible so they could get it up and running again, and I guess I don't know, get their tax farm going. And then that the insane asylums in the 1800s were really kind of like re-education camps. And then you also talked about the World's Fair and how it's really just all made out of plaster and like it's grandiose, but ultimately it's kind of just a facade. Um, and that those world fairs were kind of like indoctrination events to like teach an alternative history to these orphan trained in repopulace who basically are like a civilization with amnesia, um, trying to, to come to terms with like all this infrastructure around them. Um, I don't know. So yeah, what do you have thoughts on that? There's what do you mean by the orphan trains, and like what's your perspective on that?
in the 1880s, there are photographs of steam trains that you had 10 cars behind a steam train packed to the gills with children between the ages of 3 and 8 years old. Size-wise, that's I'm estimating your age. You're probably 14, 15 years old, because of my bias on modern kids versus then. But those trains actually, the origin point of those trains had to have been on the tracks, and you can look back at the old track maps and get an idea of the areas, but um, you don't see structures that would account for that. You figure for every child there had to be two parents. So let's say a family had 6, 10 kids. Um, where is the building that they lived in? And it's just not there. And it's like, what the hell? Where do these kids come from? For me, that's a huge mystery of Earth. But yeah, it's weird, man. Something definitely happened, but who the hell knows what happens now? Like I was saying, I think a lot of those bones in the catacombs in Paris are definitely from that period. Now, I didn't get over to Rome, but I guess there's catacombs in Rome as well, so I'd be curious what's down there.
Oh wow. Okay. Well, I'm glad I found a subject that even you don't know too much about, because yeah, that's been puzzling me. All this weird stuff that's been coming out recently, the whole Tartarian narrative, and just, oh yeah, the 1800s. It all comes back to the 1800s and some fuckery going foot. But all right, yeah, that was all the questions I had for tonight. It's been a really interesting chat. I'm definitely going to go back and re-listen. I came in late. Been great.
I'm going to share. I'm going to share a photo of this building over, and this is to give you an idea. It's a $40 million mansion on Palm Beach in the historical section of Palm Beach, and I've got a photo of the I guess it's the western. No, it would be the northern wall from inside. And you got to take a look at what you see here in this photo, and you'll see what I'm talking about with the way stuff was slapped together for those World's Fairs in the same time period.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I guess we'll wrap it up and see you guys next week. Thank you all, and God bless you all.
May God keep everyone that you love, everyone that you know, everyone that you care about. Keep them safe, holy, healthy, and may you all have a great week. I'll talk to you next week.